Hi, welcome to the February 4th, should have been February 3rd episode of the Benmore Brief. We had a long day. We're getting in a little bit after hours here. A couple key topics that we'll go over today. So that's going to be basically the SaaS headwinds. Some people are calling it the death of SaaS. I'll kind of lay out my opinion on what that means, considerations, mobility. Is this overhyped? In my opinion, is it not overhyped? We'll talk about something internal here at Benmore, which is sort of the need for KPIs, like something that I came across that was super interesting is KPIs, performance metrics, and how important those are within an organization. We'll talk a little bit about collaboration in an in-office environment, and then we'll talk about soft skills in SaaS and kind of the rise of the forward deployed developer and kind of also how we utilize that methodology here at Benmore Technologies. So that being said, let's first talk about this SaaS headwind. So a lot of SaaS companies, Salesforce, Figma, I even think Netflix is down, but there's a huge SaaS sell-off going on right now, per my Twitter timeline. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's the end of SaaS. And, the prevailing rationale is that with the commoditization of code, a lot of companies are going to rebuild a lot of these internal tools that they were typically utilizing. These third-party tools that they were previously utilizing internally. That would look like essentially a large company rebuilding Microsoft Teams, their own version of Microsoft Teams, their own chat platform, or rebuilding their own version of QuickBooks, or rebuilding sort of like common workflows. Their own documentation system or something like that. Common workflows or common systems that large organizations would utilize, they'd be rebuilding them internally. And so there's this massive SaaS sell-off, and obviously that's a prevailing sentiment. Who knows in the market what's actually going on, but that's kind of like the conclusion. Now, my opinion when it comes to this is I think it's slightly overhyped, and I think it's for two main reasons. One is the data moats that these third-party companies have. Second is going to be connectivity and ecosystem. And then third is just the constraints of large organizations. So, essentially like one thing, and I know especially at large organizations, like even at, massive companies, they're very particular about their data. So even large SaaS platforms technically don't own the data. So it's like, what is the data moat essentially? Let's just say a large company is utilizing Slack, for example. They have 10,000 employees on Slack. To my understanding, I think the company itself owns the data, and I think this is relatively common that the company itself owns the data. That doesn't really change the fact that the SaaS company, the third-party company, owns the, housing of the data. And it would be extremely convoluted to export and migrate away from these SaaS platforms due to the data holding. So regardless of who owns the data, obviously if the SaaS platform, if Slack owns the data, that's like a huge moat because it's like they can do all of their analysis on it. I know a lot of large companies, a lot of large SaaS platforms will ask their customers if they can utilize their data for training and stuff like that. That's super common at like AI companies, etc. But regardless, they kind of hold the walls, and they kind of have access to the data. Regardless of who owns the data, they hold access to the data. And this is like a super common thing that we even see at Benmore at the SMB and mid-market level when it comes to migrating away from existing SaaS platforms. It's extremely tough to migrate away from a SaaS platform. And like when we talk about sort of the interconnectivity of these SaaS platforms, it's also in the SaaS company's best interest to not make a migration away from their platform as easy as possible. They want switching costs to be high. Now, whether or not this is malicious, it's just kind of a function of profit and just general sort of business practices. It's like, well, you're in our ecosystem now. Why would you do you think when a SaaS company is like outlining their roadmap of what they want to do, definitely not at the top of their list is, let's make it as easy as possible to for our customers to leave us. That's just not going to be the case. So the switching costs of these platforms due to the data is going to be high. Some of these SaaS platforms probably own the data, so they have their own moat. And then the workflows as well. Like they own the workflows. That's a little bit when we talk about the constraints of large organizations. So I'll talk about it in just a sec. But they also own the ecosystem. So a lot of these SaaS platforms have these relatively robust plugin marketplaces, or in Slack, for example, they have sort of this ease of external connections. You can easily start talking to another organization within Slack if they're also on Slack, Microsoft Teams as well. So they own the ecosystems, and then they also own potentially the data. If not, they own the access to the data, and they own the switching cost sort of determination as well. But then they also own sort of the workflows. And this is where it comes into the constraints of large organizations. If something's cemented in a large organization, a workflow, a feature of their own product, but more so like a way of doing things, the switching costs are extremely high. It's a hard hill to die on for a VP to champion a project that's essentially saying, hey, we can save $1 million a year by building our own version of Slack. Then, it's a hard, and then like the consideration there is just like, well, what if that project goes sideways, and what if Slack goes down, and what if internal communication at the company goes sideways? Hard sell up the line. This isn't even, that's like a communication platform. Now there's maybe some low hanging fruit SaaS platforms, but I do think that like Salesforce, like think about how hard that is to sell up the line, right? Like I want to champion the own creation of our CRM, right? Like that's just a hard thing to sell up the line. And I don't know if the commoditization of software is there just yet, where we're seeing these discussions sort of get approved. I'm sure that the discussions are happening, and I'm sure that there's some low-hanging SaaS that will get sort of replaced by internal tooling. But, I would assume that the larger sort of more necessary and closer to the heartbeat of a large organization level of SaaS platforms are good, and they're there to stay, and they have enough time to pivot into the age of AI, and maybe they can pivot into more integrations into AI, and they can build out workflows that work more natively with AI, and they plug into Claude, for example. I think that they're fine. Maybe some low-hanging fruits, in terms of SaaS platforms will get replicated. That being said, in the tech space, I know that a lot of large organizations historically have kind of built their own internal tools from the ground up because they have the resources to do so. So I could be wrong on that, but my assumption is that at non-technical F500 companies, the SaaS companies are fine, they're here to stay, and they have enough runway to pivot or adopt and integrate with new AI workflows. That doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be ease of picking up new customers, though. And this is where I do think that the hype is not it's not overhyped. Sure, they may be able to retain existing large organizations, but let's talk about the mid-markets. Let's talk about, beyond the F500s, let's talk about the companies that are 1,000-person headcount. They're just making their technical decisions. They're just, sort of really coming to conclusions on, for lack of a better word, getting in bed with certain third-party SaaS platforms. Are these massive giants going to be able to sell to them and continue their long-term sort of hold on the industry? That is where I think that there's more of a claim on AI sort of disrupting the space. Because, and we see this at Benmore as well, you're a 1,000-person headcount company. You're just looking down the line at you're just making these sort of org-wide decisions on what the productivity, system you're going to utilize, what your sales system is going to look like. You just are starting to make these sort of like cemented decisions. You kind of have a choice of cutting a check for a software that you don't own and you're renting. And you kind of get the headspace that, well, this platform is going to be supported, but it's a hefty check. And that check's only going to increase as you bring on more people to your organization, or you can make a decision to rebuild the software internally or utilize a consulting company to rebuild the software for you, and you own the software and you don't have to pay for user growth over time. And you can literally put it as an asset on your balance sheet, and you get some enterprise value from it as well. But then you kind of trust this new process of AI, and you also still delegate support to another organization, but it's just more of service level support. I do think that traditionally The obvious play there was with SaaS, especially you saw this boom of like super customizable SaaS. You can go to Salesforce and customize it to which way you want. But now I do think that we're going to see a lot of dominoes falling the other way, in the sense that you're going to see a lot of companies and mid-sized organizations kind of going the internal software route. I mean, why wouldn't you? You have the opportunity to rent software. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why you wouldn't, right? To be clear, brand name, not proven in the space, the headaches, the roadmap. If you go through implementation with Salesforce, it could be a way quicker sort of roadmap to get that up and running than building something from the ground up. Security concerns, all of these concerns, right? But that sort of meter where it was like very much so, you always went with SaaS, you always sort of like got in bed with large SaaS companies. I still think that there's plenty of arguments for going with large SaaS companies, but the argument for going for boutique software in the age of AI is definitely sort of creepy. I don't know if it's going to overtake it, but I think it will in the coming years. And we've seen this here at our company. Dominoes are definitely starting to fall, especially if you price against outcomes and you price against future outcomes as well. If you get in bed with a SaaS company, oftentimes it's a per user payment. So as your org grows, your bill increases. But again, like you get sort of that risk aversion with the security, the maintenance of this large platform. But I do think that we'll start seeing a lot of dominoes fall the other. And that, in that sense, I don't think is overhyped at all. I think that we are going to see, and obviously, quick disclaimer, like this is what we do at Benmore. So like I'm biased and I want it not to go the SaaS route. But I do think that we're going to start seeing dominoes fall the other way. So regardless, I do think, there's a whole bunch of considerations to take into account when it comes to SaaS and sort of the sell-off that's going on. But I do think if there's one component of that that's not overhyped, it's mid-market. And it's sort of the ability of these SaaS platforms to attract the new wave of customers coming in. The new wave of, companies that are growing that they have to attract and retain. I think we'll start seeing dominoes fall the other way. All right, so let's talk about something that, I learned today at Benmore was KPIs. Okay, now a quick context surrounding Benmore. We've been running off a lot of sort of internal knowledge, a lot of just peer-to-peer training, and you kind of do that at the startup stage, right? Like you have a core team and everyone's kind of there assisting everyone. Processes haven't been ironed out, performance metrics hasn't been ironed out, and it definitely got to a point recently where I don't think people knew what the performance metrics were. And so recently we implemented something internal here, a couple KPIs that are extremely important. And, we're seeing this is why, these things exist. Just being able to point people towards very clear performance expectations, very clear numbers that they should be hitting, etc. It does such wonders from just an organization-wide perspective. And again, I don't know, this is just like a cool little tidbit of something that I've learned, especially building the company here at Benmore. The other thing that one of our first hires here, Arkish, said to me is that he was talking, I think, to one of his friends who's in VC or something like that, and he says around an org size of 10, which our onshore staff is about at an org size of 10, you have to start implementing these processes. You can't keep on running off company culture, sort of company knowledge and peer-to-peer stuff. You have to start implementing robust training processes, performance metrics, expectations, etc. And that is definitely a growing pain of ours that we encountered. So, we implemented a couple KPIs, and I will say, again, just like an interesting thing from my perspective. Wow, what a wonder! What a, how I'm surprised we didn't do it earlier, honestly. But it's one of those growing things. So I can say, definitely as an organization grows, in my experience, implementing clear KPIs, outcomes, expectations, etc. can only help you. And if I were to go back and do it again, I would have implemented those things a lot earlier. But you live and you learn. You can't really figure that out. I'm sure you can figure that out by reading it. I'm sure this is very well documented. But again, just a cool experience that we went through as a company at Benmore is sort of the efficiency of implementing clear performance metrics. And it's like, well, surprise, surprise, when you tell people what the expectations are, and if you derive solid, fair performance metrics, things run better, I know. But then again, it's my first time running a company at this size. So yeah, it's interesting, right? Just an interesting, thing that came up in the past couple of days here at Benmore. I'll end here on this last topic, which is essentially kind kind of what I'm seeing in relation to the rise of soft skills and sort of the shifting developer skill set. So obviously, Claude Code and these AI systems, Claude Bot, whatever, they're really developing a super robust tool set. You can have, and I'm hoping for a Sonnet 5 drop tomorrow, but you can kind of have a very robust tool set. These tools continue to do more and more in terms of implementation. Still, I think that you need a human in the loop, absolutely. I saw this tweet the other day where it was like AI has sped up the writing of code, it didn't speed up the thinking about code. And that's so true. This was made so clear to me when I was setting up my buddy with Claude Code the other day. He's non-technical. And Claude Code recommended that he rebuild a funnel that he had for, a system that he's trying to make, like a social, like a marketing, I think it's a marketing funnel, but like a sales funnel that he had made previously on like a SaaS platform. He's trying to recreate it custom with Claude Code. And Claude Code recommended building it in HTML, CSS, and JS. And I was like, no, let's go Next.js route here. Let's go, because that's easy deployment to Vercel. You also need a backend. You need some integrations here with Stripe and whatnot, and you need a dashboard. I think HTML, Java, I don't think, the vanilla stack, HTML, JS, and CSS is going to do you any favors here. But that's sort of the decisions that maybe with more context, Claude Code could make those decisions, but we're definitely seeing it's important to have someone who's an expert sort of leading those decisions. But regardless, just because implementation has sped up, I think that we are seeing a sort of shifting skill set for the developer. And no better this exemplified by the rise of the forward deploy developer. But I think that soft skills for software developers are becoming extremely important now. Communication, expectation setting, project and time management, relationship management, people management, research, etc. These sort of soft skills, presentation, really these sort of tangential skills that you would almost expect, I think, in a more business role, are definitely sort of bleeding into the expectation for software developers. I saw a couple tweets mentioning this. And that's just because like the pure implementation where you would spend 6 hours of your day just writing code, that's getting sped up. So it's like, and also sort of the talent alpha, if you want to call it, is shifting away from just being like cracked at implementing code, and it's to being cracked at thinking about architectural, and architectural decisions and sort of specs when it comes to implementing software. And that's interesting. I really don't see that slowing down. That's something that we as a company have absolutely benefited from and sort of nailed into our culture and expectations, is that you come in here, actual coding is like 30% of the job. The rest of the job is completely soft skills, is completely, architectural decisions, expectation setting, all that other stuff that I mentioned earlier. And I don't see that slowing down. And I saw this tweet earlier today where it was talking about large orgs being able to adopt AI efficiently. And, that's because I think, like my claim was, I think that's because AI sort of provides value at the individual level. So like your developer can just, if their company provisions access, can just download Claude Code, spin it up, write a large, anyways, they can download Claude Code and see basically immediate value. You don't need some company-wide transformation or initiative or like retrain, like really at the individual level. If you just pull up Gemini and do research, or if you pull up Claude Code, depending on what your company gives you access to, or Codex, you'll see immediate value. And so I do think that these tools are being able to be adopted throughout large organizations. So I'll even say, and I don't work at a large organization right now, but I would say that even at large organizations, these sort of developer expectations are shifting rapidly as well. And even in governmental and sort of like really traditional, like behind the T when it comes to like modern tech trends, I would assume even there the expectations are changing. And if they're not, I guess you can have a couple very fortunate developers where they can do 90% of their job with Claude Code and just but it's going to come, right? Like people are going to pick up on that and sort of the expectations are going to shift. So I do think that overall, across the board, companies of any size, the expectations are changing. They're changing rapidly, and I think that's absolutely here to stay. So anyways, relatively quick sort of conversation today in relation to the Benmore Brief. Got it in a little bit late, a little bit after the bell. But yeah, in the next couple of days, we should have a couple of my colleagues, Ali who is currently working at a real estate startup, and I think they just raised money. And then also a former teammate of mine, Jack Frisbee, potentially on Friday, who's currently doing a lot of work over at Noble Gas, and is doing a lot of work in terms of their development, and also one of our clients over at Noble Gas, and we're helping them build out a rewards program for their sites, car washes and gas stations and stuff like that. So we should have some pretty cool guests in the next couple days, and hopefully, as we set up the programming for next week, we'll be able to bring in some more guests. But until then, you got me today, and just me. So we'll see you all tomorrow, and thanks for joining in to this episode of the Benmore Brief.